How are we all doing? So, Strength Chat episode 20, and today I'm going to chat about high intensity versus high volume training. What takes longer to recover from? So, before I get into the main bulk of this episode, number one, I want to point out that the light above my head makes me look like I've got a halo. And number two, I just want to give you some definitions of what intensity and volume are. So, for anyone who's listening who isn't really sure what I'm speaking about, intensity is defined as the amount of power you can use to perform an activity. So this is where I'm talking about if you're performing a squat or a deadlift or a 100-meter sprint or something like that. Volume is how much work you do. So that's expressed as maybe the amount of reps that you're doing in a session, or maybe the total weight that you've lifted during a session. Taking these into account, the success and failure of a training program is dependent on managing your fatigue levels from previous training sessions, and these fatigue levels are caused by the amount of intensity or the amount of volume that you use. Okay, if you're fatigued all the time, you're not going to get the best out of your training. You're not going to get the results that you want. So, to know how to plan your training week to get the best out of your training week, it's best to know which workouts cause the most fatigue. So, a recent study actually compared this. So, they looked at high volume training using sets of 10 reps at about 70% of your 1 rep max versus high intensity training, which use sets of 3 reps and 90% of your 1 rep max. Now, judging by, I've just said the definition of what volume is, how much work you do, okay? You might already know what I'm going to say, but they found that high volume training caused more inflammation, more muscle damage, suppressed force production to a greater degree and for a longer period, so sometimes up to 72 hours in fact, compared to high intensity training, okay? So to answer the very first question, what takes longer to recover from, high intensity, high volume, it's going to be high volume, okay? You're doing a lot more work, it's going to take a lot longer to recover from that, okay? As I've said before, okay, so for anyone who have watched any of the other episodes, high volume training, there is a relationship between high volume training and hypertrophy and muscle building, okay? However, like I've said before, again, if you watch one of the other episodes, more isn't always better, okay? Especially if you increase the volume too soon. So, yes, it takes you longer to recover from. If you're muscle building, obviously you do need high volume, okay? But I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a couple of minutes. That being said, don't take away from this that the best route to take is to strictly train with high intensity because, oh yeah, I know, high volume, that'll fatigue you, so I'll just lift heavy all the time, okay? Lifting heavy and lifting at a higher intensity too often can actually result in your central nervous system having a little bit of a burnout, which just means that you're just going to be massively fatigued all the time. It creates a greater amount of stress on your joints. And if you're lifting heavy all the time, that's a massive amount of stress on your body and that gives you a higher risk of injury, okay? So, lifting for if you lift regularly for long-term high intensity, that can have an effect on your recovery as well. So, you may be sitting there and watching and thinking, well, what do I actually take away from this episode? I would advise, if you are having a high volume session, okay, I would plan an easier or a rest day after that session. So when it comes to lifting heavier on your heavy day, if you like, it doesn't affect it as much. Okay. Alongside this, as with most things that I've chatted about, most topics that I've covered, it's based on you as an individual. So what else I would recommend is start looking at your training, start seeing how it's actually going, okay? So if you're already doing lots and lots of high volume, but you're having to drop the weight down to get the sets done, or you're missing sets, missing reps, or weights are absolutely flying and you're able to increase it, have a look, see how it's going, okay? If you are dropping the weight, if you are missing reps, maybe the volume's too high, okay? If you're lifting really high intensity, but you're not hitting the weights, okay, maybe add a little bit of volume and build that base in, okay? So have a look have a look at how your training's going, and then that way you can dictate what's going to be the best route for you. So if you've got any questions on your training, on your recovery, or you want to get involved in training with me, just comment below. If you've got any questions about this topic, comment below. I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can. But as always, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.